You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Here again with another reading for the family. Before I get into the reading, just want to remind you guys that this show, the Bitter Medicine Podcast, is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows in the network I urge you're being invited to tune into.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron, on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys tune into all those shows. Make sure to subscribe to their channels on YouTube. Click the bell to be notified when they're on live or they have new content up. So make sure to do those things. As for me and my channel, a little update. I guess I've gotten half of the prerequisites you need for monetization. And so it seems like in arriving at the number of watch hours that's required, it seems that they've unlocked the community tab for me. So I've been using the community tab, kind of like a social media spot. So if you guys are subscribed to the channel and you click the bell to be notified about anything new appears on the channel, you guys should be seeing a few of these posts. And one post was kind of interesting to me. There's this one post I put up yesterday. It asks, it's a poll, it asks, which show format do you appreciate most from the Bitter Medicine Podcast? The options were Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze, book club, book reviews, interviews, reading and discussing research papers. And I gotta say that the response kind of interesting. Now, I'm showing you it on Firefox on the screen. That's the prompt. Those were the responses you could choose from. For some reason, Firefox is not showing the percentages from the poll. And the poll is still open, by the way. I got 7 votes on it. You guys can still go on and vote on that poll, right? You can still go on and vote. But from the 7 votes, overwhelmingly, Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze is the format that folks appreciate the most, followed by interviews. But there was 0 votes for book club, book reviews, 0 votes for reading and discussing research papers. Now, I'm going to be doing stuff like this periodically, putting out polls, to kind of understand what is it that the listeners, the regular listeners to my show, appreciate most. And of course, I'm going to delve into those areas that the listeners like most. But I was a little bit surprised that folks don't appreciate book club book reviews. It's wild to me. And research paper discussions, like no one appreciated those things. So I'm going to keep the poll up a little bit longer. I urge you, if you feel differently, I urge you to go ahead, go to the community tab, right? And select the option of the format that you prefer. Because when the new year comes around, if it stands that it's shoot the breeze and it's interviews, then I'm going to cut down on how many shows I do a week and just do shoot the breeze. And, you know, try to do a midweek interview show where I interview interesting folks in the community, I guess. So it's important. If you're listening to my voice, go to the community tab and, you know, make sure to put in your vote for which format you prefer, right? The more votes, the better. The Learning Curve is here. That's the Revolutionary Matron. Make sure you guys are tuned in to the Learning Curve podcast. Says, greetings, laughs. She says, people are fickle. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. But if I get, you know, a considerable number of votes and it stands that those two things get, you know, 0 votes and those other two things are what people interested in, well, in the new year, I'll pivot and I'll do more interviews during the midweek, and I'll do shoot the breeze on Saturdays as I have been. All right, thank you to the Revolutionary Matron for being here today. Thank any of you who are listening in the playback. If you're here lurking, thank you for being here as well. Let's get into the paper. Now, this paper is it's titled African Culture as the Basis of World Culture, and it's written by one Dr. John Henrik CLARKE. So I figured people would like, even though there's 0 votes on research papers and discussions, I still think people would like to hear discussions centered around Dr. John Henrik CLARKE. Right? I think you can't miss with Dr. John Henrik CLARKE, perhaps Garvey, in terms of people tuning in and listening. So let's read this paper. Right? So here's the introduction. Within the last year, in both national and international scholarly circles, the role and impact of African people on the history and culture of the world is being reconsidered. This reconsideration has been brought into being by the publication of new works of depth and insight by both Black and white scholars. After many years of neglect and distortion, African history and culture is at last being put into proper perspective as it relates to the world history, culture of the world. The publication in the United States of the book, The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality by Sheikh Anta Diop, brought new light to this subject. This was followed by 2 other books in English, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa and Black Africa, The Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State. That sounds like a good book to have on the shelf as well to read. In this preliminary paper, the main focus of my attention will be on the struggle of Black Americans, causes in African world history and culture that respects all the known facts in the matter. I have called this struggle, quote, the dilemma, crossroads of cultural history. Dilemma, crossroads, cultural history. The Learning Curve says we're looking at the poll. Sorry about that. Down, my bad. Thanks for that, Revolutionary Matron. Again, thank you for being here and being attentive with me. Yeah. So in this preliminary paper, the main focus of my attention will be on the struggle of Black Americans for causes an African world history and culture that respects all the known facts in the matter. Called this struggle, quote, a dilemma, the crossroads of cultural history. This brings us to section 2, general remarks. A, Black Studies, the dilemma, the crossroads, has long historical roots, and there is no way to understand this dilemma if we look at it only as a current event. The demand for Black studies grew out of the demand for civil rights. Of these demands, the concept of Black is beautiful, quote unquote, Black is beautiful, and quote unquote, Black power was born. B, there is a need to look at least briefly, at the events in history that brought this dilemma into being. Must again go back to the period of the second rise of Europe. All the world was changed to accommodate this event, which was followed by the European conquest of most of mankind. Conquest was achieved by the astute use of two political instruments, Bible, gun. Side note, these days, if you go on Twitter, there's a lot of conversations about the colonizers' religions. There's a lot of our folks who want to maintain their European religiosity. But again, if you listen to the facts, you'll know that these religions, here Dr. John Henrik CLARKE talks about the Bible. The reality of it is the Bible and the Quran, as well as the gun. Right? We have to deal with that book, or those books. We have to really deal with it. I don't know what it's going to take to get our people to disassociate with these colonizers' publications, right? Continue. The Europeans, in addition to colonizing the world, in turn colonized the writing of world history. Now, world history lost its broad definition and became a rationale for European control and a means for the glorification of European people at the expense of other people and nations whose civilizations were old before Europe was born. First European attack was on African culture. Next move was to deny that this culture had ever existed. A look at this culture will show, in part, what Black study programs are about or should be about. This brings us to C. C says Africans were great storytellers long before their first appearance in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Rich and colorful history, art, and folklore of West Africa, ancestral home of most Afro-Americans, present evidence of this and more. D. Contrary to a misconception which still prevails, Africans were familiar with literature and art for many years before their contact with the Western world. For the breaking up of social structure, the West African states of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, the internal strife and chaos that made the slave trade possible, forefathers of the Africans, who eventually became slaves in the United States, lived in a society where university life was fairly common. Scholars were beheld, reverenced. We still hold our scholars with reverence today? Is that the thing that we still do today? You guys let me know in the chat or in the comment section. Do you think that we still uphold our scholars today? Yeah, we talk about Amos Wilson, we talk about John Henrik CLARKE and a few others, but are we really? Because again, most of these guys I just mentioned, Kwame Ture, Runoko Rashidi, most of these guys, Dr. Ben, these guys died in poverty. And in some cases, abject poverty. A lot of these guys weren't even able to bury themselves. So are we really keeping that tradition? Let's go to E. There were in this ancestry rulers who expanded their kingdoms into empires, great magnificent armies, whose physical dimensions dwarfed entire nations into submission, generals who advanced the technique of military science, scholars whose vision of life showed foresight and wisdom, and priests who told of gods that were strong and kind. To understand fully any aspect to Afro-American life, one must realize that the Black American, not without a cultural past, though he has many generations removed from it before his achievements in American literature and art commanded any appreciable attention. That's why I say the elders, scholars are not being upheld, because you wouldn't have these factions that we see today if folks were really tuned into and listening to an elder like Dr. John Henrik CLARKE. F. I have been referring to the African origin of Afro-American literature and history. This preface is essential to every meaningful discussion of the role of the Afro-American in every major aspect of American life, past and present. Before getting into the main body of this talk, I want to make it clear that the Black race did not come to the United States culturally empty-handed. G. I will elaborate very briefly on my statement to the effect that, quote, forefathers of the Africans who eventually became slaves in the United States once lived in a society where university life was fairly common. Scholars were beheld with reverence. During the period in West African history from the early part of the 14th century to the time of the Moorish invasion in 1591, the city of Timbuktu, with the University of Sankore in the Songhai Empire, was the intellectual center of Africa. Black scholars were enjoying a renaissance that was known and respected throughout most of Africa and in parts of Europe. At this period in African history, Sankore was the educational capital of the Western Sudan. In his book, Timbuktu the Mysterious, Felix Du Bois gives us the following description of this period. Quote, scholars of Timbuktu yielded in nothing to the saints in their sojourns in the foreign universities of Fez, Tunis, and Cairo. They astounded the most learned men of Islam by their erudition. That these Negroes were on a level with the Arabian savants is proved by the fact that they were installed as professors in Morocco and Egypt. Contrast to this, we find that the Arabs were not always equal to the requirements of Sankore. If you're listening to my voice right now, that means you're listening to this show. Make sure to hit the like button. Whether you're here live or you're listening to the playback, hit the like button. Doesn't cost you a thing. Helps out the channel immensely. All right? Hit the like button. All right? H. I will mention only one of the great Black scholars referred to by Du Bois. Ahmed Baba was the last chancellor of Sankore. He was one of the greatest African scholars of the late 16th century. His life is a brilliant example of the range and depth of West African intellectual activity before the colonial era. He was the author of more than 40 books. Nearly every one of these books had a different theme. He was in Timbuktu when it was invaded by the Moroccans in 1592. Was one of the first citizens to protest against his occupation of his beloved hometown. Along with other scholars, he was imprisoned and eventually exiled to Morocco. During his expatriation from Timbuktu, his collection of 1,600 books, one of the richest libraries of his day, lost. West Africa then entered a sad period of decline. During the Moorish occupation, wreck and ruin became the order of the day. And this is why I don't understand why Black folks allow grifters to tell them stuff like, you are Moors, right? I just don't get it. It just shows me that You know, maybe that poll is correct. Poll that says that people ain't really trying to hear book reviews and book club book reviews and all that kind of stuff. Right? We are people, and you know, tune into the pro-black perspective and this current mini-series on the open secret of white domination. These folks are learners, man. These folks read. You know, I was walking through this part of Brooklyn the other day called Park Slope, which is kind of a pretty affluent neighborhood. And you observe those white folks, man. They put books out, and white folks walk up and thumb through the books. You know, I'm sure if I put books out in the black neighborhood that I live in, folks ain't picking that up. You got to pick up on this stuff. You know, we have to pick up on this stuff. Oh, Dorico Cooper Photography is here saying, peace, family. Peace to Dorico Cooper. I haven't seen you in a while. When I do, it's for a fleeting moment, but I'm glad that you're here. I hope all is well with you. The Learning Curve, that's the Revolutionary Matron, says, we do not pay our thinkers. We should if we want them to think for us. Absolutely. Why would a smart person become a thinker only to die in poverty? In other words, why would he think for you? But yeah, you know, this is just proof of, you know, the fact that black folks would allow themselves to be duped into this Moorish thing. And it's not to say there weren't a couple of sub-Saharan Africans involved with the Moors, but they weren't the dominant group there. And then look what the Moors come and do after they get removed from Spain. During the Moorish occupation, wreck and ruin became the order of the day. You know, we're gonna have to do. I have too much stuff on the plate, but someone, I would hope someone, and I would like to help if someone around was to dedicate themselves to it. But we got to really do a deep dive on this Moor thing a little bit, because the Moors seem to be the missing link to a lot of BS, if I'm honest. Moors seem to be a missing link to a lot of BS, and something we got to go a little deeper and study. The Learning Curve says we seem to think that education should be free, that the state is going to provide us with liberation education. Shaking my head. Absolutely. The state ain't trying to raise you up. And this idea that education is free, you don't put your money behind education. You put your money behind the NBA, behind Michael Jordan, behind the cable companies. I'm not knocking that, you know, if that's what you want to do, but I am going to knock it if that's what you want to do and you don't do anything. You don't put your money behind your own liberation. That's putting your money behind some organization that's doing the work. That's putting your money behind our talented educators, our scholars, our thinkers. Putting money behind having your own independent schools, because you should know by now that these schools that they have your kids going into are really just prisons. They look like prisons. They function like prisons. So what are they setting you up for? Prison. We got to start becoming more readers, man. You have to become more knowledgeable, and not knowledge just for the sake of knowledge, like I always say. You've been following the nation building series I've been doing, the reading of nation building. You know, knowledge is cool, but knowledge has to be followed with some action. That's what we got to be on. To continue, when the Europeans arrived in this part of Africa and saw these conditions, they assumed that nothing of order and value had ever existed there. This mistaken impression, too often repeated, has influenced the interpretation of African and Afro-American life and history for over 400 years. Changed from a letter point system to a number point system. So number one, all Black study programs, when they are properly run, are restoration projects. The objective is to restore what the slave trade and the colonial system took away. The objective is also to establish a new definition of what Black people have been, what they are, what they still must be. How would you guys answer that question? You guys listen to my voice either live or in the playback. How would you answer those three questions? What have Black people been? What are they now? And what must they still, what should they still be? Right? What they still must be. Right? How would you answer those three questions? To continue. Again, I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. To continue, in his new book, The Challenge of Blackness, LaRon Bennett Jr. states that if Black people are not what white people said they were, then white America is not what it claims to be. What we have to deal with here, therefore, is a contestation at the level of reality. We are engaged in a struggle over meaning, a struggle over the truth. Let me read that again. In his new book, The Challenge of Blackness, LaRon Bennett Jr. states that, quote, if Black people are not what white people said they were, then white America is not what it claims to be. We have to deal with here, therefore, is a contestation at the level of reality. We are engaged in a struggle over meaning, struggle over the truth. I want those words there to sit with you guys for a minute. This is a short paper tonight, by the way, so we're not going to be here much longer. I want to pause here, though, for station ID break. Be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
Make sure you guys are tuned into all of those shows. Also, the network is trying to expand, trying to get more Black equals African voices talking about the things that's necessary in this day and age for Black folks to build, for Black folks to unite, and for Black folks to become empowered, right? And so we're looking for voices that speak on different aspects of Blackness, of Africanness, like spirituality. Let's talk about economics, etc. And so we'd like you guys, you or someone you know, we'd like you guys to be in tune with this message here.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
Yes, indeed. What are you going to do? So this is the work that we need to do. What are you going to do as far as this work goes? Last order of business, I want to point out, I don't have it here queued up, but thanks to the Revolutionary Matron from the Learning Curve podcast, we do have merch for KWAZ Radio podcast. So you guys make sure you go over to the merch store. The link is in the description. Make sure you go over to the merch store and support your favorite shows on KWAZ Radio. You know, that's a good way to support. You get something back, something tangible, and let the hosts know that you appreciate their shows, and the proceeds, I'm certain, will go towards making each show better, making the network flourish, right? You can also, if you want to, you could donate directly to my show, Cash App, and $BITTRMEDZ, right? $bitter MEDZ, bitter meds. Again, any proceeds that I get, you know me, I try to make the show better, one form or another. Discord, be the show. So make sure you guys check out the merch store. Give thanks to the Learning Curve, Revolutionary Matron, and that's how you can support each of the shows. KWAZ. The Harsh Reality Podcast is here. What's up, D-Web? He's saying merch. Salute to the Revolutionary Matron. We appreciate you, sir. The Learning Curve says, we have been naive, we are foolish, must become self-determined, focused. I like that response right. Right? That's her response to those three questions. Right? I like that response. Right? The three questions were what were the three questions? The three questions were who we were, what have Black people been, what they are now, what they still must be or still must become. And the Revolutionary Matron's response to that was perfect. We have been naive. We are foolish. We must become self-determining, focused. That's a excellent response. Thank you very much. That made my day, actually. Your response made my day. Right? In his, the struggle that Bennett refers to is both national and international. Out of this struggle, the future of mankind will be decided. People decide who they are. They also decide what they have to do about their condition. See, that's exactly, that's another side of what I always talk about. Once you identify the problem, once you identify and acknowledge a problem, you got to do something with the problem. You got to, and again, this is why I talk about, like, you got to turn knowledge into action. When people decide who they are, also have to decide what they're going to do about their condition. Right? It's the only in the abundance of water is a fool thirsty. You gotta you have to do something with knowledge. To continue, first they look backward in order to look forward, Sankofa. Then try to find out how they were lost from history in the first place. Right? And that's something we could talk about during a shoot the breeze or something. What are all the missteps? We really need to list them out. It should be something like on a poster or something that we create that just lists off all the missteps we made and the promise that we'll never do that shit again. This brings us to a section called Part 2, Background, some assumptions that confuse and distort the study of African history and world history in general. So these are like lettered bullet points. A, The assumption that the people of African descent had no culture prior to the European contact. B, the assumption that ancient Egypt was a pseudo-white nation and that its culture was European or Asian and not African. And a lot of folks, a lot of our people really do believe that shit. And a part of the problem is that we're not putting out the works, the visuals, right, to change that thinking. You know, every couple of years, these white folks bring out some Egypt story with a bunch of white folks in it. The other day, they brought out, they quote unquote reconstructed the head of Nefertiti or one of them. I made her look like a white woman. You know, we have to start putting out that works, those visuals. We gotta start putting out the stories that change our outlook on our past, change our people's general outlook on our past, on our history. You'll change how they view our future and the work that they'll do towards a better future for us. C, the assumption that Africa made no contributions to the early development of Europe. D, the assumption that slavery was, to the Africans, quote unquote, a blessing in disguise. How many Negroes have you heard, especially you Bible thumpers, not as much as, you know, not as much, sorry, the Bible thumpers more so than the Quran thumpers, but the Bible thumpers and the Quran thumpers are talking about the blessings that we got from this nonsense that we've been dealing with from these folks, right? A blessing in disguise. In the chat, the Revolutionary Matron says, we do not control the people of nation. We do not control the people nation. E, the assumption that the Africans had no civilization and made no contribution to mankind prior to its contact with Europe. Brings us to part 3 of this paper, of this short paper. Afro-American history, main currents, pieces. Again, seems like some bulleted items. A, background to this course. Quote, the African people, their influence on world history. Also, quote, Africa, the beginning of the troubled years, 1400 to 1492. How many of you have read these publications? How many of you have read or even heard of these publications personally? Right? I know Amazon watches every damn thing I does because I'm always ordering some African-centered publications. Now I gotta go back. I just ordered something today with the Dogon for my research, and now I gotta go back and order something else if I can find it there. B, the pre-Columbian presence of the Africans in the so-called New World and their first impact on it. C, extension of the slave trade, slavery in the American colonies from 1619 to the American Revolution. D, American independence and American slavery after the Revolution. A review of the contradictions, the impact of the Haitian Revolution on the slave systems of the quote-unquote New World. E, resistance movements in the first half of the 19th century. Massive slave revolts, the impact of David Walker's appeal on the thought and action of the abolitionist movement after 1829. You guys could check out both the Learning Curve and the Pro-Black Perspective went over David Walker's appeal. You guys should go and search out those episodes. Check it out. F, the impact of the black elite of the abolitionist movement, Frederick Douglass, John Russwurm. You know, I was just reading some of John Russwurm today, actually. Samuel Ringgold Ward, Samuel Cornish, and Henry Highland Garnet. Martin Delany and the concept of African redemption and repatriation. G, Haiti after the revolt, the making of a black nation, revolt in Jamaica. H, the Civil War, emancipation, the new quote-unquote freedom and new illusions, black political power, brief and fleeting to 1875, Reconstruction, black political power, short day in the sun. I want you guys to take note of this stuff because this is basically curriculum that he's breaking down here, right? And so this is something that if you want to get your kids engaged, your young learners, right, you should go right down the line here. Introduce them to these thinkers, the movers and shakers of the past. Introduce them to these concepts like the Haitian Revolt in 1791 to 1804. Talk about the Civil War, and if you notice, what does Dr. John Henrik CLARKE do here in the listing of these actionable items in terms of study? It's Pan-African. It's Pan-African, right? So this is what I could take this right now and I could sit down and put together a nice little pamphlet, if you will, on this type of information, and this could be distributed to the kids. You want to help with that? Let me know. The betrayal of Reconstruction, the emergence of Booker T. Washington, 1875 to 1900. The making of black institutions before and after the betrayal. J, the impact of Booker T. Washington on his times, the impact of W.E.B. Du Bois on his times. You know, Dr. John Henrik CLARKE is a big Du Bois fan. Big Du Bois fan. And, you know, make of that what you will. You know, some of us like some people more than others. You know, I have problems with Incruma, where I think he was a bit too egotistical. Some will call him a traitor because he married outside of the race, of course. I think it was too, you know, looking back on it, I think he was too egotistical. He wanted to be the man, and so he was willing to you know, cut off his nose to spite his face type thing. But I'm going through some axioms from Kwame Ture, from Kwame Nkrumah, sorry. And it's just, the man is on point. Man is on point. It's a shame that he does the other stuff that he does. You know, because that stuff is what makes him say that Garvey was a little bit too racial, right? The fact that he married a white woman, of course he had to say Garvey was a little too racial. But what I'm getting at is, you know, it's an old saying that we have as African people is like, yeah, you chew the meat and you spit out the bones, man. You take the best of it and you make the best of it, right? The learning curve says that should say we do not control the peopling of our nation. We do not control our cultural legacy. We just include others in our history. Absolutely. Multiculturalism does not work for us, right? Uwabantuum is here, saying Jambo Indugu. The learning curve says African-centeredness. I think that's in response to when I said, if you look at what Dr. John Henrik CLARKE is listing here, it's African-centered is actually Pan-African at that, right? The learning curve says we need to produce films. Why aren't our filmmakers putting out CGI films that show the best of us? Absolutely. You know, because it's just easier to sit back and let this white boy do all the work. Yeah, the white boy is putting out some damning images of us, right? Yeah, he was, you know, yeah, he's putting out some damning images and some stereotypes and whatnot, but it's just easier to let him do the work. You mean to tell me I gotta go sit down with Blender or something and learn how to code or whatever it is or design CGI just so that we could have some positive messages in our films and in what we take in as far as television and stuff goes? You know, a lot of us don't really want to do that work. The Harsh Reality Podcast says something that's absolutely correct. I know I wouldn't debate that. He says Du Bois was the original Boule. I'm willing to debate that with anybody. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, I think that's a given. You know, this is why I have issues with Du Bois. But there's times, if you read Du Bois, for example, there's times where you hear something real sensible from the guy. You know, Incruma is a misogynist, but you read, I'm telling you, you read this Axioms Kwame Nkrumah book, guy was on point. And he's so on point that it becomes almost unbelievable that this guy marries white. It's mind-boggling. You know, I think it was KW Don 7 or someone said that Incruma felt, well, she's she's white, but she's from Africa, so it's good enough. Well, that's not really good enough. But it's interesting. Rico Cooper Photography says, we have been great and still are great and will continue to be great. We just have amnesia, generally speaking. However, grand scheme of things, we have only been losing for about 5 minutes. I mean, that's an interesting way of looking at it, right? If you look at it as, you know, as the grand scheme of being 24 hours, and we've been losing for 5 minutes of it, you know, I get it. The thing is, though, we shouldn't be. The thing is, we shouldn't be happy about being in this losing 5 minutes. You know, we want to get back to the previous, you know, mostly 24 hours, right? The Harsh Reality Podcast says a broke clock is right twice a day. Never said the Boule is full of dummies. Oh, no, we know the Boule. I mean, the Boule, I mean, frankly speaking, you got to be real about it. The Boule is the talented folks in the population. The problem with Du Bois and them, and even Du Bois had to admit it later on, was that the Boule was self-serving. Those dudes were about individualism and doing better for themselves. And they actually turned on him in the end. All that bullshitting that Du Bois did and being a part of that Garvey must go and all that type of stuff. In the end, Du Bois went to Ghana. Died in Ghana, if I'm not mistaken. You know, and I think he's buried there as well. You know, so yeah, a broken clock is right, as the matron likes to say. Broken clock is right twice a day. The learning curve says exactly, want to take from them the information that is useful. Exactly, want to take from them information that is useful. All right, so let's continue. Let's finish up this paper. So we're in part 4 of the paper, some prefaces to the present. A, the Black American enters the 20th century, new dreams and new illusions. B, Pan-Africanism, nationalism and survival. The emergence of W.E.B. Du Bois, First Pan-African Conference, London, England, 1900. The rise of the new black radical elite, W.E. Du Bois, W. Monroe Trotter, and others. This is the Boule that the Harsh Reality Podcast talking about. Again, you guys make sure to go and check out the last episode, the most recent episode of the Harsh Reality Podcast, with Canon Hotep. That interview with Canon Hotep, that's a good interview. You guys should go and check that out. It just shows you how there's people out here doing work, but the problem is we often don't know the people who are out here doing work. And so, you know, platforms like the Harsh Reality Podcast, the Learning Curve, Pro Black Perspective, my own, Bitter Medicine Podcast. One of the things we try to do is bring to you the people, or at least their thoughts, their ideas, their works, people who you haven't really heard about all the time. We try to bring them to the fore. Like, for example, like a lot of folks, until Oni started talking about Carlos Cooks, a lot of folks didn't really know about Carlos Cooks. And by the way, shout out to Oni Tase. Oni Tase, as it turns out, Oni Tase is on the continent as we speak, as far as I know. At least he was there earlier today. Shout out to that brother for making it home. Yeah, I paused and I gave some silence to that because that's good, man. I love to see it. All right, next is my time to go. Hopefully he's making some connections to do some work out there. Sure, it's a vacation, but I'm sure there's some work that can be done as well while he's there. Shout out to that brother for making it home. The Learning Curve says exactly, we take the best from the past and build on a sure foundation. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not going to shun. I used to have this thing, certain people I didn't want to really hear from. I'll be honest with y'all. MLK Jr. wasn't really a big fan. And I'm still not a big fan. Right? But there's some things, some ideas, some moves he made that I can get behind. And so I'll take those things and I'll just leave the things that I don't find useful, leave that stuff to the side somewhere. Right? Again, I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. Make sure you hit the like button. It takes you a second to do. It's free. Hit the like button. That's going to help a small channel like this one. So you guys hit the like button. And again, thank you for being here. Share the episode as well. Right? So let's continue. So the creation, so this is still part of B. The creation of the Niagara movement in 1906 and that of the NAACP in 1909. Now the NAACP, again, that's associated with Du Bois. That's really some ooish created vessel, right? I guess it's useful information in terms of understanding all the tactics that these guys use against us. But I guess it's worthwhile talk about if you're trying to expose learners to our history. I guess it's something that you do have to talk about. C, the end of the Booker T. Washington era, which is 1915. The emergence of Marcus Garvey, which is 1916 through 1925. The challenge to the leadership of W.E.B. Du Bois. There's a lot to learn in that point right there. Let me tell you, if you study Booker T. Washington, I don't think Booker T gets as much credit as he should get. I think a lot of folks just talk about Booker T from the standpoint that, there was some white folks who really liked him. You know what I mean? Like there was who was it? President Coolidge or something invited him to the White House and all that kind of stuff. But Booker T, what Booker T was doing in education, if it wasn't for guys like Du Bois, kind of being a thorn in the side of the work that he was doing, we might be in a different position right now. This is why you have to keep an eye on Du Bois. If Booker T and Garvey were able to connect, remember Garvey opened a school in Jamaica based on what Booker T did with Tuskegee. And the idea was for him to come and to connect with Booker T, but Booker T died before he got to America, before Garvey got to America. So Booker T really is someone worth studying. In fact, I've done whole episodes on Booker T. You guys can go back in the archives and check those out as well. D, the Black American between the wars, the Harlem Renaissance period, 1920-1930, the Great Depression, and the rise of a new protest movement. So let me tell you something funny to me. I grew up, I'm from the Caribbean, of course. And I grew up reading these little books. I don't remember the titles of the books now or who was putting them out, but like, I guess an equivalent today would be like Dover books. Like, you guys know Dover puts out like W.E.B. Du Bois books, Soul of Black Folks. They put out like Marcus Garvey's Message to the People, and they're like $3, $4, $5, right? I remember reading these little books that, as a kid back home, that used to talk about the Harlem Renaissance, all the musicians and the artists and all that kind of stuff. And, and then it made its way to like Malcolm X and those guys who were walking around Harlem and stuff, like those greats who were walking around Harlem. And one of the first things I did when I came to live in New York, came to go to college in New York, went to Harlem, man. That's what you want. I mean, now you go to Harlem now, you'll be disappointed. But Harlem in the mid-90s still was black. Now, of course, it was white before it was black, to be sure. But Harlem in the mid-90s still had some cultural relevance. And then when Bill Clinton came and put his office there in Harlem, after he was president, that was the downturn for Harlem. And people knew it too. That's the messed up stuff. That's the messed up stuff. Black folks knew what was coming too. E, new days and new illusions. The Black Americans in the post-war world, 1946 to the present. The rise of new leadership like MLK Jr. The new and last period of A. Philip Randolph. Black protests, quote unquote, Black power. That brings us to part 5 of this paper, but I saw D. Webb said something that needs to be said. The Harsh Reality Podcast says, despite any issues with Booker T, he was talking trades and self-reliance long ago. We could have cornered an industry on his ideas and be much further ahead than we are now. Absolutely. And there's a talk that Dr. John Henrik CLARKE gives, actually. You can find this talk on YouTube. I think I posted on the Discord too. It might be under Conscious Videos. It's probably under Conscious Videos, but John Henrik CLARKE talked about the fact that coming out of slavery during Reconstruction and whatnot, that really and truly the blacks in the South had the talent, they had the skills, right? And with a school like Booker T's school, would have built upon that too, because what Booker T also did, he connected the trade with the business side of it. You go back and listen to the episodes I did on Booker T, you'll hear me talk about that. He had a system going on, each one teach one type of system. And also, like, while you were learning how to build this house or this sidewalk or whatever, you were talking about pricing. You were talking about how to, be efficient, how to make a profit. Kids were talking about how much money they could demand for hourly rates and all that kind of stuff. So he connected to not just teaching trades itself, but he connected the business or the entrepreneurial mindset to it as well. And that needs to be talked about a little bit more too, right? We could have been further. Go check out that Dr. John Henrik CLARKE video on the Discord. You'll see what I'm talking about. So part 5. The Black Studies explosion and how it grew. A, the concept was reborn during the Civil Rights Movement. B, it grew out of a new search for identity, definition, and direction. C, it led us to where we are, standing on the ground of Black and beautiful. D, Where do we go from here? So that's the question I have for you guys as well as I get to the conclusion of this paper. Where do we go from here? We have a kind of a blueprint, if you will, for bringing learners up to knowledge, up to some consciousness, right? The good elder, Dr. John Henrik CLARKE, tells us right here in bullet points too, very clear, clean reading. What should we be reading? What should we understand? What points in our timeline, is important for us? And he lays it out here. Okay. So now what's next? Once you have this whole image, right? Once you have this whole image, this whole timeline, what do we do with the knowledge? Remember, knowledge is nothing unless it's followed by action. So then what's next? The learning curve says we need to recognize and better synthesize our past out of context, and we refuse to control our narrative. We know we deserve to relax, but our adversary never sleeps. We should neither. Yeah, evil doesn't sleep, man. The wicked don't take a day off. The wicked all the time. KW Don 7 is here, y'all. So what's up to KW Don 7? KW Don 7 says, the only problem I have with Booker T. Washington is that he was content with being disconnected from Africa, much like Frederick Douglass. KW Don 7, I think me and you actually talked about this before. I used to think that too, until I read a paper where the brother Booker T. Washington was in Togo, if I'm not mistaken. Right? He was in Togo, and he was taking his system, his education system, to Togo. Now, a lot of Africans in America, by the time slavery ended and Jim Crow was proceeding, to be honest with you, a lot of Africans, similar to today actually, were kind of anti-African, to be honest. They felt that the U.S. was their homeland and that they had to be U.S. centered, But Booker T did show that, he did show, at least in an instance or two, he did show that he wanted to help in Africa. Now, what I didn't like about Booker T and them wanting to do work in Africa is a lot of the Africans in America tended to have a kind of demeaning outlook on Africans, right? Who was it? Was it Delaney? And those guys who wanted to, who called Africans, what do they call them all the time? There's a word that they use, and I can't remember. Not Bushmen or something. There's a kind of derogatory term that they all used to use for Africans. And the mentality, even Garvey kind of did it too. The mentality being that, well, we over here have to go over to Africa and subdue the savage, right? And bring light to the savage in Africa, which that just never resonated well with me. And Booker T was on that type of thing. Delaney was on that type of thing too, and a few others, right? KW Don 7 said that was due to his mixed ancestry, right? The learning curve says, as Pan-African people, we need to accept our contradictions among our people and clearly identify that as a group, each individual supports their group without regard of their personal relationships. I can get behind that too. I think that's the message that we should always have, that individuals will do some dumb shit. What is the group doing? Is the group following the individual, or is the individual supposed to follow the group? Right? We have to have group dynamics that foster empowerment, that foster nation building, etc. Dorico Cooper Story says, music is the weapon. Quote by Fela Kuti. Right? I think, to build on what Fella said, because Fella was a musician, I think all of it is a weapon. I think the arts, I think we sleep on the arts as being powerful in getting the message out there. You know, we sleep on that too much. There's a reason why these folks push the hip hop that we have today, and why that hip hop has gone global. There's a reason for that, because it's you know, the mainstream hip hop that they're pushing is to tear people down, and you know what I mean? And so there's a reason for that. So yeah, I absolutely agree. If we had more dudes out here like, you know, how we had Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and Jacob Miller and all those folks, even the Mighty Sparrow and Kitchener and them was on some positivity. We had that, like KRS-One and Grand Nubian and you know, etc. If we had those folks putting out the music, you know what I mean? And that's the music that we need to support, not the goofy violence and you know, the goofy violent bullshit that we hear all the time. That's what we need to put our minds and our dollars behind. This brings us to the conclusion. Like I said, it's a short paper. In his book, Tom Tom, John W. Vanderkook states that, quote, a race is like a man, that it uses its own talents, takes pride in its own history, loves its own memories, can never fulfill itself completely. I like that too. As a teacher of African and Afro-American history, my main mission in life is to teach Black youth and the adults who will listen. What is our elder trying to tell us here? You got to get to the youth. Once these adults are destroyed, man, you might turn 2% of them or something, you know? But as the youth, if you could get to the youth, that's where the power is, right? My main mission in life is to teach Black youth and the adults who will listen to use their talents more creatively in their struggle for total liberation and nationhood. To do this, of course, they must also be taught to take pride in their own history and love their own memories. Search for self-definition is what has brought us to the present phase of our history that I call the quote-unquote Black and Beautiful Plateau. This position is both good and bad. It is good because all the talk about Blackness, Pan-Africanism, the World Union of African People, and nation time, quote-unquote nation time, has made Black people reconsider themselves as human beings and their place in the world history, past and present. It is bad because a large number of Black people, especially in America, have used the quote-unquote Black and beautiful phase of our history as a cop-out. How y'all feel about that? They have wallowed in Black fantasy, made no contribution to Black liberation. These grifters that I always point out, that's what they deal in. They deal in uplifting your ego, right? They deal in fantasy, not reality, right? Also that they can come up, right? They're not contributing a damn thing to Black liberation. At this juncture, we need to take a good look at the past with the hope that it can illuminate the present, indicate the future. How did we arrive at this state of self-discovery and self-deception? Europeans recovered from their long night of internal strife and confusion, 15th and 16th centuries. They began to expand beyond the borders of their respective countries. Portuguese landed along the west coast of Africa during the first half of the 15th century. Africans, not knowing of their intentions, invited their future conquerors to dinner. This act reveals something about the Africans' humanity, about their traditional hospitality to strangers, and about their tragic and historical naivete. Shout out to the revolutionary matron. This was the beginning of Africa's time. Trouble. You know the word that comes to mind when I read that? Stranger danger. Right? Stranger danger. That's what we got to teach these kids. We talked about it during Shoot the Breeze, I think it was. A black kid who was already being bullied by these white kids in school, right? Already had made, through his mother, made some complaints to the school about this bullying. Then accepts an invitation to go to these folks' house for a sleepover, where of course they bullied him, made him drink piss and whatnot, shot him with BB guns and all types of bullshit. When you understand stranger danger, though, you will understand not to go and put yourself in that kind of harm. And that's what we have to be on out here, right? Our downfall as Africans was we were good with strangers. Imagine that. During the slave trade and the colonization period that followed, Europeans would not only colonize most of the countries of the world, but they would also colonize the teaching of history itself. Human history was rewritten or rearranged to make it appear that the world waited in darkness for the Europeans to bring the light. In the meantime, these Europeans destroyed civilizations that were well developed and old before Europe itself was born. The Africans were erased from the respectful commentary of history in order to justify the expansion of Europe. The image of the African as being black and ugly emerged. This was the image that the quote-unquote black and beautiful phase of our present-day history is trying to destroy. The war against this image is what has brought us to the black and beautiful plateau. Question now is, how do we move beyond this plateau to our next state in history, that is nation building? First, we will have to take serious stock of ourselves as a people. Those of us who are shouting nation time, committed to the hard work that goes into bringing a nation into being and maintaining it, I would say, me personally speaking here, I would say no. In fact, I would say we're still in the black and beautiful plateau. We're still in that plateau. That's what all that black melanin popping and black girl magic and all this stuff, that's what that is. We're still in that phase. We're still in the phase of talking about nation time without really doing any groundwork for nation. You know? We have to be real about the situation. We're still in this black is beautiful plateau. First, we will have to take serious stock of ourselves as a people. Are those of us who are shouting nation time committed to the hard work that goes into bringing a nation into being and maintaining it? How many of the shouters for nation time know how to make an airplane fly? Ouch. They talk about this all the time. This white boy is going to space above your head and putting up satellites and all space stations and all type of shit. What are we doing? Shooting marbles and playing with fiddly sticks or something. How many can cure stomach aches? How many can make muddy water drinkable? Come on, Dr. Clarke, don't do them like that. At what point will we finish convincing ourselves that we are black and beautiful? This is a highly complex world. It can neither be ruled by blackness nor beauty. It can only be ruled by people who know how to handle power. Powerlessness of black people is more of a deterrent to their fight for freedom, direction, and definition than their blackness. Come off that black is beautiful, melanin popping. Yeah, that's all well and good. Right? That's all well and good. Let's get to real nation time. Right? In this kind of world, being black and beautiful means nothing unless ultimately you are also black and powerful. Black and powerful. That's the end of the paper. I hope you guys found that enjoyable. I think Dr. Clarke in general, pretty enjoyable indeed. You guys, let me know what's your last final comments on the paper. See, there's been some comments. I'll touch on those comments on the other side. The station ID break.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Once again, like we always do, make sure you guys check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Hope you guys enjoyed this paper tonight. Enjoyed this reading. Before I go, I just would like to say, just like to remind you guys that I have the community tab up on YouTube. I put a poll up there. Let me show it one more time. Put this poll up there on YouTube. Which show format do you appreciate most from the Bitter Medicine Podcast? These were the 4 selections: Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze, book club, book reviews, interviews, or reading and discussing research papers like the one I did tonight. It doesn't show up here on Firefox, but on the actual poll itself in another browser like Chrome, you get to see that 86% of people said Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze is the most appreciated format. 14% said interviews, and 0% for both book club reviews and reading and discussing research papers. You feel differently to those outcomes. I would really strongly advise you go to the poll, put in your vote tonight as well. Put in your vote tonight, or whenever you're listening to this podcast, put in your vote, because the outcome of that vote, when there's a sufficient number of voters, is right now there's 7. The outcome of that will determine how I go about the show in the upcoming Roman New Year. Right? So make sure put in your votes. This will determine how I go about the show in the future, right? So make sure you guys do that. So let me go to the comments in the chat. The Learning Curve says, I wonder how much Booker T studied economics. You need to remember that the Eurasian keeps dividing the strength, knowledge, and race consciousness of the African. Well, I will say this. Booker T was in charge of like several business initiatives and business incubators, etc. in Atlanta. I don't remember the titles correctly right now, but he definitely was attached to a lot of entrepreneur initiatives in his time. So I would imagine he understood economics pretty well. Did he have his own economic system? Well, I doubt that. I think a lot of those guys were thinking that you could have integrated into this European system and flourish. Right? But that's something to look into. Rico Cooper Patavi says, if we are going to change our situation and get back to winning, we have to first decide to win and have a solid plan with clear objectives. Earn the boat, get it done. BAMCIS. The House Reality Podcast says to the learning curve, I said it once and I'll say it again, gotta stop focusing on the 85% and build our tribe. Otherwise, suffer the same fate as Malcolm, Huey P., Garvey, Fred Hampton, etc. Learning curve says 100. I say it as well. KW7 says there's a lot of feel-good rhetoric going around, i.e. we built this country, we built hip-hop. Yeah, that's the, you know, I'll tell y'all something. That type of stuff is as bad as religion. Because that's a kind of religion unto, it's like self-worship. You know, ego. Right? And that's how you get these people to tithe. The grifter who's bringing that message. Right? That's how that goes. And until we can stop that, you know, until we can stop that, you know, we're going to have problems for the foreseeable future. The House Reality Podcast says, hell, start KWAZ as a tribe. General, Chief, Baba, Koku, let's get it. LOL. I hear you. I feel you. We're getting some stuff done, man. But if it was based on intention alone, this thing would be huge. But when you have to work with others and make those connections and put faith in others and their accountability, can be feel a bit of a daunting task, but we're gonna get there. KWAZ Radio will get there. We'll all get there. Trust me. The learning curve says I'm with it. We even have our first economy. The learning curve says on school and media. It goes on to say KWZ has everything we need to be a nation right now. Yeah, man. If you guys who are listening, who are not a part of KWAZ per se as hosts of shows, guys can still join the nation. It's a movement. And it's real. There's no grifter amongst us. And we're going to make sure there's no grifter amongst us in the future either. It's really about getting people the knowledge to then be able to do the actions that are necessary. Derica Cooper photography says knowledge in your head is a static thing. Knowledge in use, power. What use is a library that is closed? I gotta find a way to use that line right there. What use is a library that's closed? It's the same as if it was burnt down to the ground. Make knowledge become actions. KW7 says, what good is it to say you built this and that if you're not gaining any dividends from it? In the case of hip-hop, it's being weaponized against you. That what KW7 is all facts. It's all fact. You got to be real about what's going on, man. You know, our African ancestors who were enslaved and brought to America, you were forced to build this country for others. You don't write any laws, right? You didn't write the Constitution, right? These other people's nation. You just got to keep it real. A lot of the stuff that you've created, which is big time stuff like hip hop and all that, trust me, right? But big time. But you don't own it. And like KW7, in fact, these folks are weaponizing it against your own people. They're weaponizing it in the Caribbean. They're weaponizing it in the continent and elsewhere where there's black people. You just have to be honest about these things. Learning Curve says, new byline, black and powerful. Absolutely. But we got to do the work to get power now. Derica Cooper Photography says, hip-hop has been hijacked, colonized, and weaponized against us. Paraphrasing KW7. The Learning Curve says, visually black and powerful. Ua Bantuum, number 2, is still here. Ua Bantuum, Uwe Bantam says to the Harsh Rally Podcast, you are right. Chief is a head organizer, speaker at the Learning Curve. You are right, too. Still working on the international ties. Right? And we appreciate that, too. Harsh Rally Podcast says, I never agreed to the no grifting thing. He says, I never agreed to the no grifting thing, but all proceeds will go to a good cause. LOL. I hear you, brother. He's joking, of course. Yeah, but the proceeds, whenever you buy a t-shirt, if you want to donate to a show directly or what have you, if you want to donate to Podcast Network, all that's going to go towards things that we're working on, right? The website's coming. The merch store is here, but, you know, we're going to build it up. You know, it's going to make the shows better. I saw the Harsh Rally Podcast. D-Web is actually doing FaceTime podcasts these days, so you could tune in to the Harsh Rally Podcast YouTube channel and see the brother interview Canon Hotep. So proceeds will be used for good causes for sure. The Learning Curve says, LOL, we got to eat while we build. And that's the thing. You got to, practice reciprocity. You got to put your monies behind your thinkers. Like I mentioned, Clarke, Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Ben, and others, Kwame Ture. Guys died in poverty, man. We post and repost their video snippets and all that stuff and say, yeah, without being honest about the fact that we, not necessarily you and I, but we allowed those folks to die in poverty. They should have been able to eat while they did all that building as well. Got to eat while we build. Rico Cooper Photography repeats that. You got to eat while we build. Right? I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. I just want to go through and shout out to Rico Cooper Photography, the Learning Curve, that's the Revolutionary Matron, the Harsh Rally Podcast, I know that's D-Web, Uwa Bantum #2 is here, good brother. KW Don 7, the always reliable, he's here as well. Who else was here? I missed anyone? I think that might be it. But I appreciate anyone and everyone who was here. If I missed you, please don't hold it against me. I just seem to have overlooked you. I want to thank all of you who are here. Saturday night, Shoot the Breeze. Be there. If you have topics you want us to discuss, join the Discord. The link is in the description. It's at the top of the chat. Join the Discord. Navigate yourself to the Shoot the Breeze category. Post your topics. Let's have a good time on Saturday night. You can pull up with a drink in your hand. You could have thing to smoke, thing for your nose if that's what you do. Whatever. Pull up. Let's have a good time. We had a great time last time on Shoot the Breeze. You guys should check it out, as a matter of fact. Great conversation with Mr. Untouchable, Azuliism, and the Revolutionary Matron. So you guys should go back and check that out. Let's do it again this Saturday. Till next time, guys, you guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.